husband opened our relationship but left me right after, and now I'm all alone. Hello, Reddit. I never thought I would be writing this, but here I am. I guess you never know how life will turn out. I always thought I wasn't the type to bring my private issues onto Reddit, but I guess here we are. Ironic, isn't it? Let's call my ex-husband Jason. Jason and I were married for about 5 years. 5 years of what I thought was happiness. And to be honest, it was amazing. Or at least it was in the beginning. I love Jason, and I know he loved me too. Or at least I thought he did. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any couple, but I truly believed we were happy. We didn't have any kids yet, as we had always planned to wait until our late 30s before starting a family. We were still figuring out our lives, enjoying our careers, and making the most of our time as a couple when Jason got a huge promotion. It was honestly a big deal for him, one of those career milestones that you can't ignore. I was so proud of him. It was a giant leap forward in his career, and honestly, I was thrilled for him. But the promotion wasn't just about a new title or more money. Jason was being placed in charge of an entirely new branch of his company, and it was in another state. This meant a huge move for both of us. We'd have to leave behind the life we had built in our current city, family, friends, the routines, the familiar places, and start over in a brand new place where no one knew us. At first, I was a little hesitant about the idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a good thing, a fresh start. So after a lot of discussions, we decided to go for it. We packed up our lives and moved to the new state. It wasn't easy, of course. There were so many logistics to deal with. Arranging the move, finding a new home, getting all the paperwork sorted. We even found a house we both loved. I guess I didn't realize at the time that a fresh start didn't just mean a new place to live. It meant a whole new set of challenges. And honestly, things started feeling difficult the moment we moved. Jason threw himself into his work. It wasn't just a new job, it was a whole new branch he was running. He was really determined to prove himself, to show his employers that he was the right person for the job, so he worked long hours and became almost completely consumed by it. I understood. It was a big opportunity for him, and I didn't want to get in the way. But at the same time, I couldn't help but notice how little time he had for me. On the other hand, my situation was a little different. My job didn't have any branches in the state, and since I couldn't work from home, I had to quit when we moved. I decided I would find another job, but honestly, it wasn't my top priority. I figured I would take my time to adjust to the new place first, explore, maybe make a few new friends, get a feel for things. I didn't want to rush into another job search right away. I figured I could use the break, maybe even enjoy some downtime before diving into work again. But as time went on, I started to feel bored. Really bored. Jason was always busy, and I didn't have much to do on my own. I didn't know anyone here, and honestly, I'm just not the type of person who enjoys doing things alone. I'm used to having a routine, to being busy with work, to seeing my friends. Without all that, things just felt dull. I tried to make the best of it. I'd go out and explore the city, try new places to eat, maybe get a coffee and sit in a park. But it never felt the same. It was all just boring. I really don't know how to explain it in a way that makes sense, but things just started feeling boring. I guess after you've been with someone for 5 years, things eventually settle into a routine, and the excitement fades a little. I didn't expect everything to stay as fresh and exciting as when we first got together, but I didn't expect it to become so mundane either. Jason was always the one who made an effort. He was the one who planned our date nights, came up with little surprises, took me on spontaneous hikes, or set up surprise picnics. He had this way of making everything feel special, even the smallest things, and I loved it. It was a huge part of what I admired about him, his effort, his thoughtfulness. But as his job took over, I noticed that those things stopped happening. He just didn't have the energy or time to plan things anymore. I understood that his new job was demanding, and I respected that, but it still left a void in our relationship that I wasn't sure how to fill. The problem was that I wasn't used to being the one to plan things. I'm not the type of person who comes up with elaborate ideas for dates or spontaneous adventures. I mean, I tried to come up with things, but they never felt as perfect or as well thought out as what Jason used to do. And so we drifted, slowly but steadily. He was always wrapped up in his work, which, like I said, I totally understood, but I was left with all this free time, and no one to share it with. I had nothing to do, no one to talk to. The boredom was overwhelming at times, and I wasn't sure how to cope with it. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that he'd settle into the job and things would go back to normal. But weeks passed, and the more I tried to distract myself, the more I realized it wasn't a phase. This wasn't going away. We didn't talk as much anymore. We didn't spend quality time together like we used to. Sure, we'd have dinner together most nights, but even that started feeling like a routine. It wasn't the same. I wanted us to go out, explore the new place, make new memories, but Jason was always too tired, too stressed, or just too focused on work to really engage. It was frustrating. And the worst part was that he noticed. He knew I was unhappy. He apologized over and over again. He told me things would change, that once he was more settled in with his new role, things would be better between us. But I didn't want to hear about later. I needed something now. I needed him now. But it was like he couldn't see it. Every time I tried to bring it up, all I got were promises about how things would improve. But the thing was, I was already feeling the distance between us. The boredom was already growing, and waiting for things to get better, later, didn't seem like a good enough solution for me anymore. I needed him to see how much I was struggling, to recognize that this was happening right now, not later, when it was convenient. The more bored I got, the more desperate I became to find a solution. I'm not the kind of person who can just sit with boredom. It eats at me. And then, almost like the universe knew, I started stumbling across creators on social media who were in open relationships. It was weird at first, something I never thought I'd be interested in, but the more I watched, the more fascinated I became. I even found one account where it was a group of 4 people in a polygamous relationship. That one in particular stuck with me. Now don't get me wrong, I wasn't about to suggest anything like that for Jason and me. Polygamy wasn't my thing, but the idea of opening our relationship, it seemed intriguing, exciting even. I couldn't stop thinking about how much it could fix my boredom. If Jason didn't have the time or energy to meet my needs right now, maybe opening things up would fill that hole. I wouldn't feel so restless anymore. The hardest part was figuring out how to bring it up. Jason had always been a pretty traditional, monogamous person. We'd never talked about anything like this before, and I knew it wasn't exactly in his comfort zone. But I couldn't shake the idea, so I started planting seeds. I'd bring up stories or send him videos about couples in open or polygamous relationships, trying to make it seem casual. I'd mention how cool it seemed that people could make it work without feeling threatened or insecure. I hoped he'd catch the hint without me having to outright say it. Jason isn't stupid. I knew he'd catch on eventually, and after a while of me subtly bringing it up, he finally sat me down. He told me he'd noticed what I was doing, but he didn't know how to respond. Then he asked me outright, did I want to open our relationship? I admitted it. I said yes. I told him I'd been thinking about it for a while now, and I laid out all the reasons why. Of course, the first thing I did was blame his absence. I said I felt lonely and disconnected, and that opening things up might help fill the gap while he was so busy with work. It was easier to say that than admit I was just bored and restless. He listened, and when I was done, he apologized. He said he hadn't realized how much his focus on work was affecting me, and he promised to put in more effort to fix things between us. And he did. Almost overnight, it was like a switch flipped. Jason started coming home earlier, making time for me, and doing all the things I'd missed so much, planning little dates, surprising me with thoughtful gestures, even just sitting with me and actually talking. He threw himself into our marriage with the same dedication he'd been giving to his job. For a little while, it felt like we were back to how things used to be. I was happy. But the thing about planting a seed in your mind is that it grows no matter how much you might want to pull it out. Once the idea of an open relationship took root, it was impossible to let it go. I tried. I really did. Jason had stepped up in ways I didn't expect. He was more present, more engaged, and genuinely trying to rebuild the connection we'd lost. But no matter how much effort he put in, the itch was still there. The thought of an open relationship wasn't just about killing my boredom anymore. It had evolved into something I wanted for myself, something I wanted to try. The more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it became. It wasn't that Jason wasn't enough, or that I didn't love him. I did. But the idea of opening up our relationship felt like this exciting possibility I couldn't stop thinking about. It was like the more I told myself to let it go, the more it dug its heels in. And after a while, it started to feel like the only way forward. At first, I tried to ease back into the topic subtly, much like I had before. I started sending Jason articles and videos again, bringing up stories about people who'd made it work. I'd casually mention how interesting it was or how inspiring I found their openness. I thought I was being subtle, but Jason caught on quickly. He wasn't oblivious, and it wasn't long before he confronted me about it. He asked me why I was bringing it up again, especially after we'd worked so hard to get things back on track. That was when I couldn't hold back anymore. I told him the truth. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The idea of an open relationship felt like something I needed to explore. I even tried to justify it by saying it was better to talk about this openly than to let it fester into something destructive, like cheating. Jason was shocked, of course. He hadn't expected me to bring it up again, especially not after everything he'd been doing to reconnect with me. We argued about it for what felt like hours. He was hurt, confused, and angry, and I couldn't blame him, but I couldn't back down either. I explained how deeply I'd been thinking about this and how much it mattered to me. It wasn't an easy conversation. Eventually, after a lot of back and forth, we reached a decision. Reluctantly, Jason agreed to give it a try. We set boundaries, laid out rules, and tried to approach it as carefully as we could. Looking back, I still don't know if I pushed too hard, or if Jason agreed because he truly wanted to, or just because he wanted to keep me happy. But at that moment, I was too caught up in the excitement of what could be to really think about the consequences. I was over the moon. It felt like this immense weight had been lifted off my shoulders, like I could finally scratch this itch that had been driving me crazy. I threw myself into it head first. Since I still hadn't started job hunting, I had all the free time in the world, and I intended to use it. I started with dating apps and websites that were specifically made for people looking for casual connections. It didn't take long before I began meeting people. I even started going out more. I would go to clubs and bars. And of course, being a woman, it was ridiculously easy to meet people. There was no shortage of men who were more than willing to engage in something casual and no strings attached. The first few weeks felt amazing. I had people over, went out to fancy dinners, stayed out late, and even spent the night with some of them. I didn't feel guilty. If anything, I felt alive. It wasn't like I didn't love Jason anymore. I did. But this was something separate in my mind, something just for me. Jason, on the other hand, didn't dive into it the way I did. That became clear pretty quickly. We had a rule that we needed to be upfront with each other whenever we were going out with someone or seeing someone new. But while I was out and about almost constantly, Jason never mentioned meeting anyone. At first, I thought he was just being picky or taking his time. But then I realized he wasn't even trying. Instead of exploring like I was, he just buried himself in his work even deeper. And surprisingly, I liked that. As selfish as it sounds, there was something comforting about knowing that he wasn't out there meeting other people. It gave me this strange sense of security, almost like I was still the most important person in his life, even as I was busy exploring other options. Deep down, I knew I'd feel jealous if he started seeing someone else. I didn't want to share him, not really, but I didn't think about that too much. Instead, I told myself that this arrangement was temporary. I was just scratching an itch. Once I'd had my fill, we could close the relationship, and things would go back to how they were before. Looking back, I realize how selfish that was. I wasn't considering Jason's feelings or what this was doing to him. At the time, though, I convinced myself it was fine. He agreed to this, didn't he? If he wasn't participating, that was his choice, or at least that's what I told myself to keep from feeling guilty. But even then, a small part of me wondered if he was really okay, or if he was just going along with it to keep me happy. It didn't take long for my initial excitement about the open relationship to wear off. At first, I was too caught up in my own escapades to notice much about what Jason was doing. He had been slow to get involved, and I had convinced myself that it wasn't really his thing. But then, things shifted. Slowly but surely, he started meeting people too. At first, it was just a few dates here and there, nothing serious. I didn't pay much attention because, well, I had no right to. After all, this was what I wanted, wasn't it? But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. He wasn't just casually dating anymore. He was consistently seeing someone, a specific someone, a woman he seemed to really like. It started small, with him mentioning her in passing, saying her name here and there. I brushed it off at first, telling myself it was no big deal. But then I started noticing patterns. He was spending more and more time with her, going out with her multiple times a week, and I couldn't ignore the fact that he seemed happy. At first, I tried to keep my feelings to myself. I mean, how could I say anything? I was the one who wanted this. I was the one who pushed for an open relationship. I had no leg to stand on. Saying anything would make me look like the biggest hypocrite in the world. So I swallowed my jealousy, plastered on a fake smile, and pretended like it didn't bother me. But it did. Oh, it did. The more time he spent with her, the more I started to feel like I was being pushed aside. She wasn't just a fling or a random date. She was becoming a constant in his life, someone he clearly enjoyed being around. And that made me feel replaceable. I hated it. But I still couldn't bring myself to say anything. Not yet. Eventually, though, I hit my breaking point. I couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. One night, I brought it up to Jason. I told him I was concerned about how much time he was spending with her, how it felt like she was becoming more than just a casual partner. But of course, Jason didn't let me off the hook. He called me out immediately. He told me I was being hypocritical, that I had been doing the exact same thing, going out constantly, meeting new people, and enjoying myself. And now that he was finally doing the same, it was suddenly a problem for me. He was right, of course. I couldn't deny it. I had no real argument, so I dropped the issue. But that didn't make it any easier to deal with. Jason kept seeing her, and their relationship seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. They went out together all the time, and it felt like she was becoming a bigger and bigger part of his life. The worst part? She knew about me. She knew Jason was married and in an open relationship, and she was perfectly fine with it. And the fact that she was okay with everything made it even worse somehow. She wasn't sneaking around or trying to hide anything. She was just there, always there. And the more time Jason spent with her, the more I felt like I was fading into the background. It was frustrating. It was infuriating, and it was eating me up inside. I told myself that this was what I signed up for, that I had no right to feel this way. But that didn't stop the jealousy from bubbling up every time I saw him getting ready to go out with her. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. Jason was supposed to be my husband, my partner, and yet it felt like he was slipping away, one date at a time. The more time Jason spent with her, the more unbearable it became for me. It felt like he was slipping further and further away, and no matter what I told myself, I couldn't accept it. The jealousy that I had tried so hard to suppress boiled over, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. I confronted Jason again, this time laying it all out. I told him I didn't want him seeing her anymore, that he needed to stop spending time with her, and if he wanted to continue with the open relationship, he needed to stick to casual connections and not her. Unsurprisingly, Jason refused. That was the last straw for me. I told him I wanted to close our relationship entirely. No more open marriage. I wanted things to go back to how they were before all of this started. But Jason wasn't having that either. He reminded me that I was the one who pushed for the open marriage in the first place. He said that I'd begged for it and that he'd finally given in, and now that I didn't like how things were turning out, I expected him to turn his life upside down again. I was furious. I told him that if I was the one who had the right to open the relationship, I also had the right to close it. Yes, it was twisted logic, but I was desperate. I didn't care about being rational anymore. I just wanted things to stop spiraling out of control. Jason, of course, didn't see it that way. He refused to close the relationship, and we argued about it relentlessly for days. It was the same argument over and over. I told him that I was jealous and that I didn't want to feel this way anymore, that he was mine. Jason didn't budge. And that's when I made my next mistake. Since Jason wouldn't listen to me, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I got his partner's number from his phone. It wasn't hard, considering he didn't bother to hide anything. And I sent her a series of messages. I begged, pleaded, and yes, threatened her to stay away from Jason. I told her that she was ruining our marriage and that if she didn't back off, I would make things difficult for her. I know now how wrong I was, but in the moment, I was blinded by desperation. Unsurprisingly, my plan backfired. She went straight to Jason and told him everything. When Jason confronted me about it, he was furious. I'd never seen him so angry before. He called me a hypocrite and accused me of trying to control him while I'd had free rein to do whatever I wanted. He told me he was done, that I'd crossed the line, and that this was the final straw for him. That's when he said it. Jason told me he was giving me exactly what I wanted, a divorce. I was stunned. Divorce? That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I immediately refused, telling him that we could fix this, that we could go back to how things were. But he didn't care. He packed a small bag and walked out the door that night while I was reeling. The next week was a blur of panic and desperation. I called him constantly, sent him text after text, trying to apologize, trying to explain, trying to get him to come home. He ignored every single one. I even showed up at his office, hoping to force him to talk to me, but he just had security escorted me out. After a week of silence, Jason finally came back to the house. I thought for a moment that he was ready to talk things out, that we could start repairing what was broken. But no, he told me he was selling the house. He said he wanted a fresh start, that this house was part of the life he no longer wanted. He said I still had a few weeks before it went on the market to figure out where I was going to live. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We hadn't even talked properly since he left, and now he was telling me we were divorcing, that I had to find a new place to live. I begged him to reconsider. I told him we could go to therapy, to counseling. I told him I'd even let him keep the marriage open if that's what he wanted. I just didn't want to lose him. But Jason was done. He told me he'd already checked out of the marriage a long time ago, that the only reason he stuck around as long as he did was because he'd hoped things would get better. But now, he said, it was clear that we were beyond saving. I was heartbroken, completely and utterly heartbroken. Jason told me that I'd be served the divorce papers soon, and that this was happening whether I liked it or not. And just like that, the man I loved, the man I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with, was walking away from me. The house, the life we'd built together, it was all slipping through my fingers. And the worst part was knowing that I had no one to blame but myself. I was completely fucked. At first, it felt like I was stuck in some kind of limbo. I kept telling myself that Jason would come to his senses, that he'd realize he was overreacting and come back to me. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just a fight we'd eventually get past. It was serious. And Jason was serious. Still, I clung to hope for a while, thinking maybe I could ride it out, stay in the house until he calmed down. But when Jason reminded me that the house was going on the market soon, it hit me like a ton of bricks. He wasn't bluffing. He meant every word. I couldn't stay in hope anymore. I had to act. But the problem was, I had nowhere to go. When we'd moved to this state, it was for Jason's job. I didn't have a network of close friends here, no family nearby, no one to lean on. So I packed up what I could and moved into a hotel with what little savings I had left. It was humiliating. I went from having a home, a husband, and a life that felt secure to living out of a suitcase in a cheap hotel room, completely alone. I regret every decision I made that led me to this point. I still do. In my desperation, I called his family. I thought maybe they could help me talk some sense into him, but of course, Jason had already told them everything. They knew about the open marriage, about how I'd begged for it and then tried to backtrack when it didn't suit me anymore. They were firmly on his side. Even my own family, when I turned to them, didn't offer much comfort. They told me bluntly that I'd made my bed, and now I had to lie in it. I felt completely abandoned, as if everyone I cared about had turned their backs on me. It was one of the darkest moments of my life. But I couldn't give up on Jason. I couldn't just let him go without a fight. I tried everything I could think of to get through to him. I sent long, heartfelt messages begging him to go to therapy with me. I promised I'd change. that I'd do whatever it took to make things right. At one point, I even resorted to threats, telling him he'd regret this decision for the rest of his life. It wasn't my proudest moment, but I was desperate. Meanwhile, my financial situation was becoming more precarious by the day. I couldn't stay in the hotel forever, not with the little money I had left. The stress was unbearable. Then finally, I was served divorce papers. Seeing those documents in my hands felt like the final nail in the coffin. It hurt in ways I can't even describe. I called Jason, trying to plead with him one last time. I told him I'd sign the papers if he'd agree to have just one conversation with me. I thought, foolishly, that if I could get him to sit down with me, I could convince him to change his mind. We met at a coffee shop. I remember sitting across from him, looking into the eyes of the man I had once imagined spending the rest of my life with, and realizing just how far apart we'd grown. I begged him to reconsider. I poured my heart out, but he didn't budge. He told me, calmly but firmly, that he was already emotionally checked out and that he was done. I asked if he was still with his partner, and he admitted that they were now officially together. Hearing that felt like a dagger to my chest, still does. I reminded him of everything I'd given up for him, how I'd moved states, left my friends and family behind, all to support him and his career. He apologized, and to his credit, he offered to help me financially while I figured things out. He gave me enough money to extend my stay at the hotel for a little while longer. It was a small gesture, but at the time, it was all I had. Without that money, I would have been homeless. I was alone. I had lost the man I loved, the life we'd built together, and any sense of stability I once had. I stayed in that hotel for as long as I could, but eventually I had to face the reality that I was bleeding money. Every night there drained my savings a little more, and I knew I couldn't sustain it. I didn't have many possessions to begin with. Most of what we owned was purchased with Jason's money, so it stayed with him. Once I left the hotel, I was effectively homeless. It's ironic, isn't it? I had a beautiful home not long ago, a husband, and what I thought was a secure life. Now I was wandering with nowhere to go. But even in that low moment, I clung to the hope that once the divorce was finalized, I could leave the state and go back home. I told myself that returning home would be my fresh start, even if it felt like starting over at rock bottom. The divorce process itself was excruciating. I didn't get anything out of it. No alimony, no spousal support, nothing. Apparently, 5 years of marriage wasn't long enough to qualify, and because I'd had a well-paying job for most of our relationship, I didn't meet the criteria for financial support. The court didn't care about the fact that I was now broke, unemployed, and homeless. I walked away with nothing. When the papers were signed and it was officially over, I hit my lowest point. I couldn't even afford a plane ticket to get back home. I had to swallow my pride and beg Jason for the money to leave the state. To his credit, he did help me. He bought my ticket, and I took it. That was the last time I had any interaction with him. I moved back into my parents' house, tail between my legs. My parents, despite being incredibly disappointed in me and blaming me for everything, allowed me to stay. I felt like a complete failure. They reminded me, often, that this was all my fault, that I'd destroyed my marriage with my selfishness and impulsivity, and they were right. Living with them has been one of the darkest periods of my life. I'm in my 30s, sleeping in the same childhood bedroom I left behind years ago, with nothing to my name. I've tried to move on, but I haven't been able to. I couldn't get my old job back, and every job I've had since pays far less than what I used to make. It's been minimum wage or miserable dead-end gigs, none of which offer me a chance to rebuild. I feel stuck, trapped, hopeless. Months have passed since the divorce was finalized, but the pain hasn't lessened. I still miss Jason. I miss him so much it physically hurts sometimes. I find myself checking his social media constantly, torturing myself by seeing how happy he looks with her. They're still together, posting pictures of their trips, their laughter, their love. It's as if he moved on seamlessly, while I'm left drowning in the wreckage of my mistakes. Every time I look in the mirror, I hate what I see. I hate myself for what I did, for who I've become. I've tried to pull myself together, to find some semblance of a new life, but nothing works. I can't even save enough money to move out of my parents' house. This isn't the life I envisioned for myself. I'm alone, utterly alone, and it's all my fault. I used to think loneliness was something you could shake off, something temporary, like a bad day or a cold. But this isn't temporary. This isn't a phase. This is my life now, and it's all because of me. I've driven away everyone who cared about me. Jason, obviously. My friends who grew tired of my endless complaints and self-pity. Even my family keeps me at arm's length, letting me stay with them, but never letting me forget that they think I've brought this on myself. And they're not wrong. I did. I miss Jason. God, I miss him so much. I miss his laugh, the way he used to hold me, the way he could make even the worst days bearable. I miss the life we had together, the future I thought we were building. But that future is gone, and I'm the one who destroyed it. I don't know how to move on from this. I don't even know where to start. I've tried dating, but no one compares to him. I've tried focusing on work, but the jobs I have now don't give me the same sense of purpose or stability I had before. I've tried therapy, but even my therapist seems frustrated with my inability to let go. The truth is, I don't think I want to let go. As much as it hurts, holding on to the pain is the only way I feel connected to him. It's the only thing I have left. I tell myself I deserve this. I deserve to feel this way because I caused it. I broke my own heart. I sabotaged my own happiness. And now, I'm alone. Utterly alone. There's no one to blame but me. Why am I sharing this? Why am I putting it all out here for strangers to read? Maybe because I need to unload all of this somewhere. Maybe because I want someone, anyone, to hear my story and learn from my mistakes. If you're reading this and you're in a situation where you're taking your partner for granted or you're making selfish decisions, stop. Fix it before it's too late. Don't let your pride or impulsivity ruin your life the way mine did. If I could have a time machine, I'd give anything to go back and undo everything I did wrong. But I don't have a time machine. All I have is this empty, regret-filled life that I made for myself. And I hate it. I hate it so much.